Buy, sell or rent your property with Century 21 and you could win a brand new 2-bedroom apartment on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. Visit c21prize.co.nz for your chance to win.
Welcome back to Your Property Empire. Well, joining me on the show tonight is James Barlow, Managing Director of Century 21 Sydney Commercial. Good to see you on the show. Thanks for filling in for Charles.
A pleasure. Nice to see you.
Now, obviously there's a lot happening in commercial development around Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. I gather you've been doing a lot of work around a space called higher and better use. For the mere mortals just in residential, do you want to explain what that means?
Yeah, certainly, and it also incorporates residential as well. I guess if we look back at in 2014, the state government released what was called their 2031 strategy. And they released that strategy understanding that for the Sydney region, there would be another 1.6 million people coming in within the next 20 years. And so the strategy was designed on how can they accommodate such an influx of population. And so with the Sydney Greater Commission, they've put together a plan on how to introduce another 650,000 homes. Now, in order to sort of create those homes, you have to have some rezonings in place. And that's the space that makes us particularly excited. So whether it's a residential home that could turn into a residential tower, or also whether it's a commercial property that may also have a further employment opportunity, including residential on top. That's the type of thing we're talking about.
Because I guess a lot of these kind of areas like the Zetlands and Sydney, then it suddenly goes from completely commercial industrial to then having the residential, but because it's further out of town, then that has a lot of retail, commercial and other spaces around there as well.
Yeah, I think so. So I think when they talk about creating place, being community, what's critical is to get the right mix of employment, retail, I guess also the ability for people to have an efficient lifestyle and also be close to employment. They're sort of the key drivers in that planning process.
So is there some examples of the kind of the planning and environment stuff that they're doing?
Absolutely. There's about 15 plans that they run together, so it's obviously incredibly busy and active space looking at all the cranes in Sydney. A couple that I would talk about is, I guess, last week we touched on the Northwest Metro, which is the $8 billion train infrastructure program that's going out there across 8 stations. And the other one would be the Parramatta Road Corridor Strategy. That's an interesting one. It's actually a 20-kilometre stretch of Parramatta Road that starts at Granville.
And they definitely need to do something with that.
Well, they did, didn't they?
Yeah.
From Granville all the way into Leichhardt. And that's an interesting one because obviously at Granville they're really pushing sort of Parramatta as the next CBD, so critical for this employment and this population boom. And so that's a critical one. From Granville, obviously it's very close to Parramatta. From Leichhardt you're into the CBD. But they're looking with that strategy in particular as sort of maximising that bulky good and employment that's down that strip, but also regenerating with extra density.
And so if someone's got either a residential or commercial property and it falls into one of these rezonings, does that mean you're all going to be a millionaire overnight, or what kind of things should you be doing?
It's a great question. I'm sure some of the viewers are asking the same thing. The first thing to do is, I guess, just understand, what type of rezoning opportunity you have for your particular property. And it sounds very simple, but it actually isn't particularly simple. There's a series of development controls there that will be put into that particular strategy. And so as an owner, you need to know, firstly, if I'm to maximise a new price, so I've got a residential price perhaps, but if I want to maximise into a rezoning price, what development controls really affect my property and how do I maximise an outcome of development? And so then we look at things like, I guess, heights, allowances, size of land. Do I have to get together with my neighbours? Do I have to amalgamate? You see a lot of that at the moment into a larger group to be able to create this type of development.
And so, I guess, are they automatically going to be able to realise a profit on that, or does it really just depend on the property?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Again, the big thing about, I guess, working into this new zoning area is that it isn't realised straight away. And I think there's a bit of a misconception there by possibly over-eager real estate agents and owners of homes who are going to get an increase in value ready to retire. Okay, so sometimes it just takes time. You have to understand that when these development controls are proposed, it can be literally years in the making. And to be proposed and then to be confirmed can sometimes be 18 months to 2 years. And then, of course, the developers themselves, they have to come in and run a full development application process which can be another 9 to 12 months on top of that. So I guess to answer your question, while they can see a lot of activity and a lot of interest from developers, it doesn't happen straight away. They have to be prepared to be patient to maximise an outcome. Because if I'm an owner or you're an owner and we've got developers approaching us, but we want our money very quickly, we'll actually get a lesser price in many instances.
Yeah. So any tips for these kind of guys?
Lots of tips. The first one would be, really have an understanding for those controls, as we said, and also understand what it's like dealing with developers. And that's a really big one. It's the same market, but it's a very different part of the market. Okay, so developers need those time frames to maximise their opportunity. They don't get any money back until they've built something and until they've sold something. Okay, so that's the critical one. And then it is from an owner's point of view, what does a developer deal look like? Is it under an option agreement? Does that mean I get some money up front and some further money as these things go on over a 12 or 18-month period? Do I have the opportunity to have a full exchange with a delayed settlement? So what does that actually look like from the owner's perspective?
And obviously don't get too greedy too quickly.
I think so. I think if you're patient, I can tell you something.
So we better jump into the clearance. So I know we can talk about these things for hours and the rest of it.
To be said.
Let's jump to the clearance rates and see what's going on in the market at the moment.
Yeah, no problems. Okay, one of the big things we talked about last week was Sydney leading the charge at just over 84%, and again that's reflective this week at 83.1. Also worthy of mention there is Melbourne at 84.3. But I'd just like to point out that the national clearance rate's 80.8% for this time this year, and last year it was 66.4%. So again, showing appetite for those capital cities.
Yeah, so certainly a lot of people talk about this bust about to happen, but there's certainly activity there.
Yeah.
What about homes advertised for sale?
Yeah, absolutely. Last week we saw our first decline there in 5 or 6 weeks. I know Charles keeps a close eye on this one. This week we saw a significant increase of 12.31% of homes into the market.
That's massive.
Isn't it huge? So if we're buyers looking into the market, we'll be excited to see, more opportunity come in.
And what about rent price movements?
Yeah, pretty steady there, Chris. Look, again, led by sort of New South Wales with a slight increase of 1.63%, Victoria at 2%, and the national average up by just under 1%. Tasmania lagging a little at -5%, but again, we'd expect that to come on in future weeks.
Wonderful. Sounds good. Now, just as a final thing, around the commercial sector is obviously everything's pretty buoyant in residential. How's it looking in commercial?
Yeah, it's funny. Not often do all the verticals, work together. But there certainly seems to be a significant appetite for commercial and industrial as well at the moment.
Right, OK.
Yeah.
So it's looking pretty healthy out there.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, James Barlow, Century 21, thanks for joining us.
Thank you,
Thanks
Chris.
for joining us as well this evening. Until next week, I'm Chris Gray. Good night.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.